Welcome back to the fourth and final series of our interviews with Lieutenant Colonel Charles Harrison as he describes for us the defense of Wake Island in December of 1941. Charlie, as we finished our third segment, we had just relocated your battery over behind the Pan Am American building. Mm-hmm. And it is now the 12th of December in Wake Island time. Mm-hmm. And on that particular day, there was only one air attack. Do you remember what that was? That was...
It seems to me it was a flying boat.
You're right. Mm-hmm. It was. They attacked only with a flying boat. Mm-hmm. And that aircraft was shot down by one of the VMF 211 airplanes.
Mm-hmm. He got in some strafing. Mm-hmm. But...
And then the 13th was uncommonly a lull in the fight. There were no air attacks on the 13th. Mm-hmm. And they attribute this to the fact that the Japanese submarine, who had been giving a beacon for them, had been sunk, and that's why there was no air attack.
I hadn't heard that.
And no. Devereaux kind of took advantage of that and moved his command post from the south side over to one of the ammunition bunkers located over there.
All right.
And then for the next 9 days, that is from the 14th to the 23rd, Wake time, historians have kind of characterized the Wake Island fight as being that kind of a creeping exhaustion and numbness by the defenders as you had to beat off daily attacks each one of those days. Yet with one kind of small glimmer of hope, and that happened on the 20th during those attacks. Do you remember what prompted that? This PBY that came in from Midway, and it brought some good news.
I do remember the arrival of the PBYs, but I don't remember the news.
Well, the news was that there was a relief force being formed coming out of Pearl Harbor.
Now it's coming back. Mm-hmm.
And they were expected to arrive on the 24th Wake time. Of course, they had 2,000 miles to transit. Right. And they were going to bring members of the 4th Defense Battalion, another squadron of airplanes, radars.
I remember.
And take off all but about 350 of the construction workers.
Right.
Was the news, and they were to arrive on the 24th. Unfortunately, the Japanese were going to move with greater speed than the Americans were able to do, because of course, they only had about 600 to 800 miles to do
from the Marshalls, right?
From the Marshalls. And Admiral Kajioko, when he returned to the Marshalls, he was given command of a second invasion force. But this one was much larger than his first invasion of force. And it was to have some 27 ships. There were 4 more destroyers, a number of troop transports, and it was beefed up by another some 1,000 Special Naval Landing Force that were brought over from Saipan to join his attack force, bringing his entire landing force up to about 1,500, as opposed to 500 on the first time that they were attempting to land. And they started steaming towards Wake Island. And most importantly, for the Japanese, was that Admiral Yamamoto had detached 2 of the Pearl Harbor attack force carriers, the Soryu and the Haruyu, and detached them, and they were directed to move towards Wake Island and to provide air cover for the second landing force. Now, generally the routine is all these bombing attacks happened every day. Can you describe for us, with you and your gun position up there, how your gun position fought off these earlier air attacks?
Well, it wasn't easy because, as I recall, they invariably came in right about noon, and we're staring right into the sun. So it was very difficult to get a fix on them for the anti-aircraft guns.
But generally you would be able to pick them up and start firing on their way in?
Yes, generally we got off about 20 rounds as they're coming in, And then we'd traverse that old 3-inch gun around in a hurry and catch 20 more rounds as they went out. It was pretty effective.
All the time, though, you're dodging your bombs yourself.
Yes, and trying to look through a 24-power scope on the director, which is well worth the risk, because I saw a number of them blown to pieces.
Yeah, it was pretty effective. They
Yes.
gave you a wide berth. Then on the 21st was the first day that you all noted that there were Japanese fighters escorting the Nels as they came in.
So we knew there were carriers out there.
And that must have been very.
Yeah, I remember that.
Also on the 21st, your battery position received some carpet bombing, and this was the day you almost took a direct hit. Can you describe that day, and particularly what happened to your fire direction?
Oh
chief?
yeah, I was in the director, old Sperry M7 anti-aircraft director. And as I recall, that was the day we took a direct hit on the director itself, which was a machine, had scopes just eye level. And that was the day that Big Wright was killed. He always, he didn't take cover. He just sat in a corner of the director emplacement. And
He always said that as long as he had this lucky coin.
oh yeah, his lucky silver dollar. And it didn't work for him that day. But there was a direct hit on the director itself, and we had it sandbagged in all right, and we had a sandbag shelter we could jump into just before the bombs hit. We always waited till you could see them on the way before you took cover, to take advantage of what little time you had. And I leaned my rifle up against the sandbags as I went into that shelter. And I came back out, a bomb had sliced it right in half. A bomb fragment had cut it like you'd done it with a hacksaw right at the balance.
That was the same 03 that had been issued to you in
It was.
recruit training, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, it was.
And that's the.
I was really sad over that, because you were taught to become very attached to that rifle.
And after that, they issued you what?
BAR. And I never had much faith in them anyway. And this one, first time I had occasion to fire at the Japanese, it jammed, and I didn't get off another round trying to clear it.
Then on the 22nd, more devastating news was the last two Wildcats from VMF 211 were shot down as they were attacking the attack that day. So actually we lost all the airplanes from VMF 211, and Major Putman took what remained of his squadron, and they reported to Major Devereaux as infantry.
That's right.
And Captain Elrod and the rest of them were all
That's right.
back in there.
Did a fantastic job. Captain Elrod had quite a reputation as an artilleryman then.
Yeah. Well, as we're going to jump to the 23rd, which is the day that the Japanese succeeded in capturing Wake Island. And Admiral Kajioko, this instance, decided that he was not going to do a pre-bombardment, but instead try to rely on surprise by making a night landing. And so using ships and barges and that sort of thing, the Japanese started their attack at about 2 a.m. in the morning
I remember that.
with their first landings on Wake. Now, before turning to that, I just want to mention that you had been relocated after your battery had gone. I'm going to turn to the map. If you can look up at the monitor, you had been over here behind the Pan Am building, but now you had been moved over to Battery E with Lieutenant Lewis. Were you helping to man that battery also?
Yes.
Okay. And I think that was kind of the last real battery that was left in action.
That's true.
So if we can turn now to the first slide. This depicts, if you look up on the other monitor, Charlie, this is Wilkes Island, and the landings starting about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And you can see from that cross-section the Japanese succeeded in making a penetration and actually capturing the unmanned guns of the AA battery that was located there. Before they came in, they were able to get a searchlight on them, and they fired on them, and they came under fire. But the Japanese put one company of about 110 men from this special naval landing force. It was the Tanaka Force, and they penetrated that. But the Marines weren't through. Captain Platt went back and got some reinforcements and came back at the same time that Lieutenant McAllister and Warrant Officer McKinstry formed another force. And may I turn to slide 2, please?
Slide 2.
Slide 2, or image number 2. And they succeeded in counterattacking that force. And they found the Japanese kind of mulling around. They were completely in the open. They didn't know what to do. There was an open area around the guns. And they ended up having just to attack simultaneously. It was uncoordinated. But they eliminated that entire company in a firefight that lasted less than 5 minutes. And they captured 2 Japanese prisoners. Unfortunately, this communication did not come to Major Devereaux and his command post. And later on, we'll see that he figured that Wilkes itself had been overrun, which it had not. They had been very successful in beating back that Japanese attack.
Matter of fact, I don't think there was Japanese left alive on Wilkes.
No, well, they captured 2 prisoners, as a matter of fact, and treated them very well. And now, if we can turn to slide 3. Here on the southern island, they made a number of landings by barges. If you can look up under the monitor there, Charlie, I mean this other monitor, you'll see several landing places to the south of the airfield and other places. And these 2 were very hotly contested. Some of the Mobile Reserve ran out and actually threw grenades into some of those barges. And Captain Elrod, one of the pilots there, where they were overrun, it became hand-to-hand fighting.
That's right.
And they succeeded in beating him off. And then Lieutenant Hanna took about 5 men over to a unmanned 3-inch anti-aircraft gun, which they used as a beach gun.
Right.
And at point range, this opened up on some of those barges that they came in with devastating effect.
That's right. Went completely through a couple of their landing craft.
Exactly. It just, and I guess they got into, you could see them burning even from your position and everything else.
Right.
Nevertheless, the Japanese did succeed in getting a number of troops on shore, and these kind of infiltrated their way into the Scaviola trees and everything else, and were kind of mixed all around, and the picture became very, very unclear.
Right.
At about 5 o'clock in the morning, Commander Cunningham sent his last message back to Pearl Harbor.
Enemy on the island, issue in doubt.
That's right. Enemy on the island, issue is in doubt. And by sunup, from his command post, even though he had lost communication, Devereaux could only see that there was a large number of Japanese ships, some 27, who were off the island. It was clear that the Japanese had control of the air, and he estimated there must have been about 1,000 Japanese who were had landed on the island,
Yes.
not knowing the losses that they had suffered, but that was his estimate. And that the Marines, may I see that next fourth slide, please? So that the as you see those jagged, those were kind of concentrations of Japanese forces, and the Marines themselves, they had formed a small defense line around the CPs. That was Major Potter's group, and then you were with Battery L, and they were just kind of defensive perimeters, but they'd become more and more isolated.
Right.
And this is when Cunningham and Devereaux discussed the matter, and Cunningham decided that it was best to surrender the island. And
I
so
think his main concern was the civilians.
the civilians, exactly, unarmed civilians. He was also concerned about the number of wounded who were
Yes.
about to be overrun in their position. So Devereaux ended up himself having to surrender the island. He put a white flag on a broomstick, and one of his runners, or part of his command group, started around the island telling everybody to surrender. Do you remember seeing Devereaux going by
Yes,
with
I
that?
do. He had a white sheet or something.
Right. And he told everybody to surrender, to destroy your weapons,
Yes.
and whatever lines of communication he did have some lines, and he told everybody to break up their weapons, destroy the optics, and they did that. And the Japanese slowly started to gather up all the prisoners. And you were seized fairly early then, is that right? You were
Yes.
among that first group. Tell us about how you were treated when you were captured.
You know, I don't remember very clearly. I think we were stripped naked, though, and hands tied behind the back with a line around your neck.
I think they used comm wire, didn't they?
Yes.
And slowly then you were all moved over towards the airfield, is that correct?
As I remember, we were all put on the road leading to the airfield.
Okay.
Yes, and then eventually from there on onto the airfield itself.
Actually, when Devereaux got over to Wilkes, the defenders of Wilkes saw his party coming with a couple of Japanese soldiers with this white flag, and they believed that the Japanese were surrendering.
Yeah.
Because they had been successful. And it was very difficult for Devereaux to even convince them that, no, they were surrendering the island and they were to do that.
That's right.
Eventually, by late afternoon, I think they had about 1,100 of you on the airfield, as you say. Kind of, some were bound, not everybody was bound, but had been
Right.
had to remove clothing and everything else, and were all lined up. Tell us what you remember then on that afternoon. But when you were all lined up, they had Japanese machine guns.
Yeah, we figured that we definitely were to be shot. And then, I remember the reprieve came as a little guy on a bicycle. We were all,
Was he in a white uniform? Was he? Do you remember?
I think he did, but he got there just in time. We were about to be shot, and he was waving a paper, and so everything stopped. Saved our lives, I guess.
Well, that's right. And Uren and the who wrote the histories and everything else describes that the Admiral Kajioko did come up, and that the senior commander of the landing force wanted to kill everybody. First of
Yeah.
all, they were surprised at the number of prisoners. They hadn't expected that. They hadn't even had any plans. So Kajioko went back to his commander on Truk and asked for instructions. And the instructions came back, said, "Don't kill the prisoners." So he was the one who stopped them.
I wasn't aware of that. I knew that we were saved at the last moment. but I didn't understand why.
But nonetheless, it was a very uncomfortable next couple of days for all of you out there on the airfield. I think they only gave you a little oily water, no food, just oily water.
Yes.
And they did remove, they kept the machine guns on you, but they removed the belts of ammunition, what according to what had happened up there. And that was going on. I want to read, Charlie, just very briefly, on the defense of Wake, the citation for the Presidential Unit Citation that President Roosevelt put out, and this is a citation on the stationery of the White House. It came out in January of 1942, and it said, "Citation by the President of the United States of the Wake Island Detachment of the 1st Defense Battalion, U.S. Marine Corps, under Commander Major James Devereaux, U.S. Marines, and Marine Fighter Squadron 211 of Marine Aircraft Group 21, under Commander Major Paul A. Putman, U.S. Marines, and Army and Navy personnel present. The courageous conduct of the officers and men who defended Wake Island against an overwhelming superiority of enemy air, sea, and land attacks from December 8th to December 22nd, 1941, has been noted with admiration by their fellow countrymen and the civilized world, and will not be forgotten so long as gallantry and heroism are present and are respected and honored. They're commended for their devotion to duty and splendid conduct at their battle stations under the most adverse conditions. With limited defensive means against attacks in great force, they manned their shore installations and flew their aircraft so well that 5 enemy warships were either sunk or severely damaged, many hostile planes shot down, and an unknown number of land troops destroyed." Signed, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and that's the citation for the Presidential Unit Citation. And eventually also the Defense of Wake Island Medal, which he received, of which only about 500 were cast altogether. And it was an aspiring defense, Charlie. Some have likened it to kind of the Alamo, or even the Greeks at Thermopylae, because it was a gallant defense. Historians were eventually able to summarize the number of cost to the attacking force, and they put that at anywhere from 900 to 1,000. That includes 378 sailors who were off the 2 Japanese ships that were sunk on the 11th, and also the submarine.
Those losses are mostly due to their own stupidity.
And then there were 21 aircraft brought down, which meant about 60 to 100 aviators were brought down. They're Nell bombers, either by 211 or by your AA batteries. And about 1/2 of the landing force actually had suffered casualties on landing on the 23rd. And so it was a gallant defense for a 16-day siege. Actually, only 124 people on Wake Island were eventually killed in that fight. Now, half of those, or over half, were the civilians. 65 members from Morris and Knutson, and 10 Chamorros who were Pan Am. And then VMF 211 suffered 5 officers and 28 deaths. And remarkably, from the 1st Defense Battalion, I think it was only about 28 combat casualties on the defense, which really speaks very, very well for the discipline and the ability to defend yourselves in the face of that overwhelming force. That's, what do you attribute that to as you look back over the last 70 years?
Good leadership, I say. We had very highly qualified junior officers. Most of them were college graduates of prominent southern universities mostly, but I think we had excellent leadership all the way around, NCO, staff NCOs and officers.
And now if I can see that last, if you would mind putting on that last slide 5, on the, you were kept there at the airfield for a short time, and then you went over to the old construction camp 2.
Right.
Conditions improved a little bit better.
Yes.
And then on the 12th of January, about 1,178 of you, they kept some of the construction workers there, plus some wounded and some medical.
Nita Maru.
You went on and you embarked on the Nita Maru for a very, very torturous journey to eventually 4.5 years of internment, with a stop at Yokohama, and then on to Shanghai. And again, it was that leadership, I think, that saw most of you through those years of internment as well, wasn't it?
I agree.
Yep.
Excellent. Yeah.
Well, we thank you, Charlie,
Good man.
for sharing those experiences with us. And that concludes our story on the defense of Wake Island in December of 1941 with our guest, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Harrison, who now turns, or is about to turn 90 years old and is still with us, thank goodness.
From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!